The little boy, about 6 years old, was digging through the attic full of his grandfather's trunks, books, and memories when he found a dusty old brown bottle. Looking at the label, the boy tried to discern what the faded letters meant, but the word on the label was too big for his young age. He did recognize the pirate symbol under the word as a faded skull and crossbones. Trying to sound out the letters one by one, as his mother had taught him, the boy struggled, but slowly stuttered out the 3 syllables. Ah, Pock, Al. The next letters didn't make any sense to the boy, but he sounded out each one after another more confidently than the first letter. Y, P, S, E. He thought that it, apocalypse, whatever that is, as he pulled the cork from the top of the bottle and threw it on the side. Looking into the bottle, the boy could see something moving down at the bottom. Or is it just a reflection? Pouring out the contents, the boy watched in amazement as 4 objects the size of Cheerios came tumbling out. The object landed on the hardwood floor of the attic and started to run on all 4s toward the attic door. The boy wasn't sure, but the objects had grown slightly as they fell out of the bottle. 4 little horses with riders on them, but they didn't look like the cowboys that the boy was used to. By the time the horse and riders reached the bottom of the stairs at the end of the hallway, they had become the size of a cat. Coming to the front door where the movers had left open, the horse and riders were the size of a large dog. The boy's parents and the movers were around the side of the house, inspecting a large cabinet that the movers thought they had scratched. They didn't see the horsemen dash out across the front yard. The horse and riders were about the size of a car and almost full size now. Heading down the quiet street, the riders turned the corner and charged at full gallop. The riders were not cowboys, but instead dressed in flowing robes and looking like characters from Lawrence of Arabia. The first rider's white horse was foaming, and with its mane flowed in the wind, leaning forward as the 4 of them reached the edge of the small town and started heading across the desert toward the old pueblo. The riders reached behind him and unslung his bow. The rider's eyes squinted with determination, sweating, his mind reeling, and one thought on his mind: battle. Not sure whom he was supposed to battle with, he looked over at his companions riding to his left, to his right. He knew them, but couldn't remember their names. They were familiar, but distant, and his mind was clouded as he settled back into the thought that gave him conquest. The sky was turning dark as the clouds gathered, and the wind was turning cold, a wet cold. The distance between the outlying areas and Tucson is about 14 miles, and the horsemen covered that distance quickly. The rider to Domination's left, a chestnut-colored horse charging beside Domination, was foaming, and the horse was snorting. The rider, a look of anger on his face, moved closer to his brother, his hands on the reins gripped tight. He spoke under the breath in an ancient language that was long dead, for the Sumerians built their first towers. He repeated the exact words over and over. If there was a linguist on this earth who could translate the word, he would say that the word approximated our word for war. However, nobody would know that language, having gone extinct even before the pyramids were even thought of. With the edge of Tucson coming into view, he reached up behind him and grabbed a sword, a sheath, and strapped to his back. Pointing the sword out with his right hand, his left hand still gripping the horse, he leans forward, the words on his lips getting louder and then pounding. The horse's gallop came audible to the other riders. On the other side of Conquest, the riders of the Black Horse looked toward his brothers, and his brother's words sparked a memory buried deep within his thoughts for the last bit of time. It's funny how time is meaningless, he thought as he veered his horse away from the other riders. As the riders fanned out, they were about to take the town just before twilight. On his black horse, the rider searched for a word to describe the hunger, the pain, and the hate he felt. Reaching into the bag strapped to his left side, he pulled out the object and held it up. The scales held high, the left one balancing against the right, wind whipping them wildly, and the rider lowered the scales and held them in front of the city. Hearing his brother's words brought his long-forgotten language back from the depths. and the rider fixated on the word, repeating it like his brother. The word was famine. Now the riders were about 3/4 of a mile apart as they galloped toward the modern town of Tucson, Arizona. Coming out of the desert and onto the pavement, the riders were dusty from riding through the sand and scrub brush. The storm behind them was approaching. The town was quickly as the riders. The last rider on the pale gray horse knew his purpose. He had no doubt about why he was here. He knew what he must do, as he always knew. Concentrating on the purpose that he was charged with once a long time ago, he never once forgot who he was and who his brothers were. Long ago, when men wandered the earth as nomads, he and his brothers were already ancient. Long before the fall and before humankind received the spark of knowledge, the rider and his brothers stood as lords over the world. Watching as the creatures gained their first knowledge of agriculture and eventually settled and developed their first civilization, his name was already on the lips of all humans. As the nomads gathered in the Indus Valley, his name became popular, and old men told stories about him and his brothers as by the night fire. The nomads told the story to their children, and they in turn told their story to their offspring. Embellishments crept in, and the stories were tamed down to not frighten the children. The truth frightened the adults. As the humans' first civilizations grew and their language developed, his name became both a noun and a verb. His name was Death. After many thousands of years of watching the humans worship their pitiful gods, he and his brothers retreated to the mountains of the north. From there, the four brothers were long forgotten as beings, but their names were never forgotten. Throughout the millennia, the memory of their reign continues, and their feats became legends amongst the mortals. The four horsemen lifted their heads to the sky as a loud trumpet sounded, getting louder and louder as they raced through the town. On his pale gray horse, the rider took the lead, heading toward the center of town. Breathing the air of this world made the rider sad. Feeling the wind against his face, he felt the pang of sorrow, and seeing the human as he came around the corner, he knew that the time of men on earth was over.